y'all, I am back. Sorry I had to take a little hiatus. I had some personal things going on. And for those of you who do not follow me on other platforms, who am I kidding? Nobody follows me. I'm not cool. The handful of you all that tune in and listen to me, if you do not follow me on my other social media platforms and did not see, my mother was misdiagnosed with pneumonia for a year. And by the time she got her true diagnosis, it was too late for anything to be done. And she did end up passing away a month later in the beginning of May. So I had to take a little mental break and deal with that. But I am back now. So for the few of you who do tune in, yay, I'm back. So go ahead and hit the love button, notifications, have them turned on. I will be attempting to record every week. I know I say that all the time, and then my ADD kicks in and it ends up being longer. So that is the goal, is weekly. And without any further ado, let's hop into the story. Nearly a century ago, a private yacht was built for an affluent New York resident. After the completion of the vessel, it was christened the SS Caritas. A christening is a ceremony that takes place to name a watercraft while blessing it and all those who may board the vessel, especially the crew, with safe travels. The most important part of this ceremony is to break a bottle of champagne over the bow while asking the sea to accept the name given to the boat and bring it good luck. After years of being a destination for the wealthy and famous, it was sold off to the U.S. Navy to be used as a Navy messenger and weather ship. A weather ship is also known as an ocean station vessel. It is a ship that is stationed in the ocean for surface and upper air biometrical observation that is used in weather forecasting. After the change from a party yacht of the rich and famous to a Navy vessel, the ship was renamed the U.S. Garnet in 1946. After World War II, the ship was decommissioned in Oakland, California, and the once glorious yacht was now a sitting duck with no engines. The ship's story was far from over, though, as it would get its final act as a watercraft a few years later. In 1948, the Castle Rock Camp's main cabin in Smith River, California burned down, and the owner decided that the yacht turned Navy ship would be the perfect replacement. The vessel was given yet another name as the SS Castle Rock. The ship arrived in Smith River, California, February of 1950, and was used as a dockside restaurant, lounge, and office. 15 years later, 12 heavy equipment vehicles dragged the SS Castle Rock from the waters to dry land right off of Highway 101 in Smith River, California, just minutes away from the Oregon border. It sits a few hundred feet off the road and is visible from both north and southbound lanes. Once the vessel had landed on shore, see what I did there? It was turned into an attraction portion of a destination trio that included a motel, campground, and the ship was turned into a museum/gift shop and was known from then on as the Shipashore. The once magnificent yacht turned Navy ship, then floating restaurant, and finally made its way onto land becoming a museum, finally retired for good in 2012. Many comments have been made online that state the ship was once a staple of local childhood memories and has been neglected for years and become quite disappointing. The official reason for the closure was lack of disability access. The ship sits right off Highway 101 in Smith River still, looking a bit rough and definitely looks haunted. But it's actually the hotel part of the destination trio that contains the spirits of the departed, not the almost 100-year-old ship. What was previously the Shipashore Hotel Resort sits just off the shoreline in Smith River, California, and has been purchased by the local indigenous tribe and renamed. During the glory days, a young housekeeper at the Shipashore Hotel Resort started her day like any other, very early and going room to room with a cart full of fresh bedding and cleaning chemicals. She encountered a young man while cleaning his room, and she would later describe him to police as perfectly normal and a wonderful guest. What began like any other Sunday at the hotel quickly turned into a living nightmare. Unfortunately, we hear terms like active shooter and hear events described as massacres pretty frequently these days. But in 1975, it was virtually unheard of. However, this perfectly normal, wonderful young guest would change that. Robert Paulsander was only staying at the Shipashore Resort overnight from Cincinnati, Ohio. There's no telling where he was going to end up, as he never mentioned a final destination to the staff or any other guests. His mother did mention to investigators that Sander had quit his job on February 17th and bought a rifle. She had also mentioned her son had been convicted of robbery and placed on probation a few years prior. As an overnight guest, Sander was set to check out on Sunday morning, and after his room was clean, he headed down to the motel office, but not to check out. Robert Sander, who was just barely in his 20s, stood on the balcony right outside of his second-floor hotel room on the Shipashore Resort, looking out over the ocean, trying to relax. But instead, he kept reliving his childhood memories over and over until he was finally ready. He looked out one more time at the sheer beauty of the ocean. He closed his eyes and listened to the waves crash, and while taking in a deep breath of the ocean mist, he lifted his rifle, aimed it towards the parking lot, and fired one shot into 58-year-old Barbara Harmon, killing her instantly. The next round he fired would go into her husband's abdomen. Piercy Harmon was not killed, and he laid there grabbing his stomach in the parking lot, and another guest of the hotel, who was completely unaware of what happened, brushed over to Percy thinking that he may be having a heart attack or something. Percy told him that he had just been shot in the stomach, just in time for both of them to hear another shot being fired. And this one tore through the window of the restaurant, killing 22-year-old Ella Beam. The off-duty police officer, having an early lunch at the restaurant with his wife, wasn't sure if he was actually hearing gunshots at first, but when the third shot flew through the window, killing the young waitress, broken glass hit his hand, the window vibrated next to him, and he saw her fall to the ground, and he just knew. After a short time, more shots were fired. They could be heard as Sander made his way down to the ground level, and in the manager's office, he opened fire, killing the 42-year-old hotel manager, Gordon Knott, and his wife, 31-year-old Shirley. He also shot the owner of a nearby liquor store who had just arrived at the hotel 10 minutes before the first shot was fired. It might seem like this was extremely bad luck, but Don Sanders, not to be confused with the suspect, was actually one of the few who were shot and did not lose their lives that day. So after he recovered, he was actually feeling pretty lucky after all. Another young victim, 17-year-old Denise Dedraff, was critically injured but was transported to the hospital, and she recovered from her injuries as well. Other hotel guests and staff of the resort would only endure minor injuries from broken glass, but everyone who survived was in shock and traumatized. The police were called fairly quickly after the shooting had started, and the officers could hear the additional shots being fired in the background of the 911 call. When police arrived, they found body after body, and after clearing the scene, they tended to those who were still hanging on until medical help arrived. Robert Sander had fled in his vehicle, ending up on Highway 199 that took him to the southwest portion of Oregon, about an hour and a half away from the hotel. Sander was found by Oregon State Police on Redwood Highway in Grantspass, Oregon, and was arrested without incident. He was booked into the Josephine County Jail on 4 counts of murder. At this point in time, Percy Harmon was still fighting for his life in the hospital. Sander stood before the judge in Grantspass, Oregon, where he relinquished his right to an extradition trial. Sander was then sent to the Delnorte County Jail in Crescent City, California, and eventually stood trial for 5 counts of murder. At first, Sander was denying responsibility, saying, "I didn't do it or have any part of it." But 9 shell casings were recovered on the balcony just outside of Sander's room, and at the resort, investigators also found a brand new rifle box inside of his room, but it was empty. With Sander being in the denial stage, they had no clear motive, and there was seemingly no connection to any of the victims, and as rare as it is, they did seem to be chosen at random. During the trial, there was never any revelation as to why he chose those people to open fire on, just that he traveled to California with the intention of killing someone, no one in particular, just anyone, and on Sunday, March 2nd, at around 11:30 a.m., from the second balcony floor of the Shipashore Hotel Resort, as he stood behind a wooden statue, he raised his .30-30 rifle and did just that. Many odd things occurred during this trial that just wouldn't happen today. I'm sure these types of cases are why laws change. 5 different psychiatrists testified that Sander had a total diminished capacity. This means that his mental competence was reduced so much that he could not have had the intent required to commit the crime he was charged with, or he had such a mental impairment at the time that he didn't fully understand the crime he committed. Sander's own defense attorney said that he's a sick and dangerous man, and while he tried to convince the jury that murder one was not an appropriate sentence for his client, he did not take the opportunity to move for an acquittal when a juror turned up sick right before deliberation. Instead of replacing the juror with an alternate, the judge allowed the jurors to proceed as they had previously made decisions on 10 out of the 11 charges Sanders was facing. After 7.5 hours, the jurors came back to deliver their conclusion. The jury found Robert-Paulsander guilty of all 5 counts of first-degree murder with various other charges they had tacked on. The gun Sander used was never found, and though Sander refused an insanity hearing because he, quote, wanted to die for his crimes, he would never give a reason why he did it. He also showed no remorse during the trial or sentencing. He wouldn't even stand up while he was being sentenced. The jury found Sander legally responsible for his crimes, and he received his wish to be sentenced to death. Even though Sander never gave a reason for his killing spree, one psychiatrist who testified at his trial said that Sander was severely mentally disturbed by the many traumatic events that had occurred in his childhood and teen years. Sander's father had committed suicide when he was just 13 years old, leaving him likely suffering with PTSD and depression, and he likely suffered from other ailments such as borderline personality disorder, manic depression, or displacement. Some of these things were not well known, definitely not accepted, and generally not tested for at the time. They would have given the generic psychopath diagnosis or diminished capacity, which doesn't really explain what was going on. And who knows what kind of medications he would have been given during that time for PTSD and depression, if any, and what the side effects were. Sander had also told his doctor that he wanted to commit suicide, but he didn't have the courage to do it. Later that year, partway through the holiday season, when depression seems to peak, Sander would find the courage, and on December 10th of 1975, Robert-Paulsander was found hanging in his prison cell on San Quentin's death row cell block. It's really not hard to see why this motel has had its share of supernatural occurrences. Previous wait staff have reported trays of glass exploding, toilets flushing on their own, lights flickering, and hearing a man's voice whispering in their ear. Also, one of the owners after the shooting died in a mysterious flying accident. There's just a lot of odd occurrences that surround the hotel and those that are involved with it. And with all of the darkness that surrounds this entire area, it's very likely that there were forces at play that caused this already mentally fragile young man to snap and then claimed his tortured soul for all of eternity. And that's going to do it for today's story, so I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed telling it. I appreciate your support and tuning in. Please hit the love, like, share, turn on notifications, subscribe so you never miss an installment. I am going to try my hardest to do this every week, so I appreciate your support and thanks for tuning in.